This video is for educational and infotainment purposes only. It is not intended to encourage or glorify the use of violence or criminal activity in any way. With all of the mass shootings in the United States recently, the discussion between gun rights activists and those seeking to limit those rights is back in the national spotlight. And within that discussion are ghost guns, so-called untraceable firearms you can build at home or even print with a 3D printer. They don't have serial numbers, and so their origins, transfer, and ownership history are often unknown. Now, obviously, criminals like them, but so do regular, everyday, law-abiding citizens who simply want to build a customized weapon at a lower cost. So, ghost guns, are they legal? Well, you're about to find out. I'm Joshua Roberts, attorney at law, and you are watching Lawyer Up. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about ghost guns. Specifically, we're going to start by talking about the federal firearms laws that are applicable to guns in general. Then we're going to turn our attention to private firearms, or ghost guns as they are referred to in the media, and how they are different from the traditional firearms you would buy from a commercial vendor. Next, we will talk about how ghost guns are made, the various forms of their production, and what turns a perfectly legal gun into an illegal firearm. Lastly, we are going to look at some of the steps that states have taken recently to combat ghost guns in their community. If you enjoy the episode, if you learned something, hit that like button for me. If you got something to say, put it in the comment sections below. If you haven't subscribed, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button. And you guys know it, I love it when you share my videos on social media. So let's start with a basic overview of federal gun law as it pertains to ghost guns. And of course, you always start the analysis with the Second Amendment to the United States Constitution, which protects the right to keep and bear arms. It was ratified on December 15th of 1791, along with 9 other articles of the Bill of Rights. Now, the Second Amendment is not unlimited, and the Supreme Court has been attempting to define the scope of that right ever since it was ratified. Most recently, the Supreme Court held that the right belongs to individuals for self-defense in the home, but confirmed that the right is not unlimited and does allow for certain long-standing prohibitions, such as those forbidding the possession of firearms by felons and the mentally ill, and restrictions on the carrying of dangerous and unusual weapons. In addition, many states have also placed additional restrictions such as age limitations on the ability to purchase and possess firearms, which the Supreme Court has upheld as valid. Now, the most prominent Second Amendment limitation is the Gun Control Act of 1968, or the GCA, where Congress voted to expand control over firearms like pistols, revolvers, shotguns, and rifles. The GCA requires those who are, quote, engaged in the business of manufacturing or dealing in firearms to be licensed by the ATF. In addition, firearms manufacturers are required to mark their firearms with serial numbers, and firearms dealers are required to keep records of their transactions. The GCA also prohibits certain categories of persons, like many convicted felons, domestic abusers, some illegal drug users, the mentally incompetent, and others from possessing firearms. To help enforce these prohibitions, Congress passed the Brady Act in 1993, creating the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, or the NICS. The act requires that firearms licensees, these are sellers, that they clear firearms purchases through the NICS database before transferring the firearm to the purchaser. These are the ATF Form 4473 background checks that most of us are familiar with. Now note that background checks are generally not required for the occasional non-commercial person-to-person gun transfer. Those are exempt. And interestingly, when Congress passed the GCA to help law enforcement fight gun crime, it expressly added that the act was not intended to place any undue burden on law-abiding citizens who use or make firearms for lawful private purposes. And that is because the Supreme Court has also held that the home manufacture of a firearm for personal use does not fall under the federal government's authority to regulate interstate commerce. Now note that people otherwise prohibited from owning or possessing a firearm under the GCA, like many convicted felons, are still legally barred from possessing homemade firearms. So it is not a legal loophole for convicted felons. But that is where the discussion gets super interesting in defining what constitutes a firearm that requires a license, a serial number, and a background check. A privately made firearm doesn't require those things. Which begs the question, exactly what is a privately made firearm? Well, privately made firearms, sometimes called a homemade gun and more recently called a ghost gun, it is a firearm that lacks a commercially applied serial number, rendering the weapon untraceable in the NICS database. Ghost gun is a term used mostly in the United States, originally coined by gun control advocates, but its use is pretty standard in the firearm industry today. So to understand the legal discussion behind this, you have to understand gun parts. So it's time for Gun 101. In firearm terminology, the frame or the receiver is the part of the firearm which integrates other pieces by providing the housing for internal action components such as the hammer, bolt, and firing pin, and it has threaded interfaces for externally attaching or receiving other components such as the barrel, the stock, trigger mechanisms, and sights. So the frame or the receiver is the core of the gun that you attach other components to create a traditional firearm. Handguns will have one frame or receiver, while larger platforms like an AR-15, for example, will have both an upper and a lower receiver. In the case of a firearm that has multiple receiver parts, upper and lower, usually only one part is the controlled part. For example, with the AR-15, the lower receiver assembly is legally considered the actual receiver, while with an FN/FAL rifle, it is the upper assembly that is the controlled part. Receivers are traditionally made out of steel or aluminum, but in addition to these materials, modern science and engineering have introduced hard plastics and even 3D printed materials into the receiver game. A finished receiver, and that's an important word, finished, under U.S. law, is the part legally considered to be the firearm that must be serialized or contain a serial number. Which brings us to the world of unfinished receivers, and where we see the ghost gun controversy blossom. An unfinished receiver, or so-called 80% receiver, without any additional modification, could never fire a round. So under U.S. law, it is not considered a firearm and does not require a serial number. So since an 80% receiver is not a firearm, it's not regulated by gun laws. And the big beef with gun control advocates is that the finishing work on these 80% receivers to turn them into a finished receiver can be performed with simple handheld tools. Several companies sell kits that include the specific drill bits and stencils and jigs to aid in the process. It's super easy. Individuals even organize build parties where equipment and expertise is shared to help create privately made firearms from unfinished receivers. Companies such as Polymer 80, based in Dayton, Nevada, have become well known as a top producer of 80% Glock-compatible frames. In addition to pistols, AR-15 and AK-47 style firearms are quickly becoming some of the most popular privately made firearms. And while some legislators are up in arms about these U.S. companies, overseas there are massive production centers of unmarked firearms in China, the Khyber Pass area of Pakistan, and the Philippines, who are specifically known for the production of .45 caliber semi-automatic ghost pistols. And of course, today, anybody can produce a receiver from plastic with a 3D printer. In the beginning, many of these 3D printed guns looked like toys. However, advancements have made them virtually indistinguishable from traditional firearms. So if Congress doesn't address the overseas production and the 3D printer guns, hounding these U.S. companies isn't going to make even a dent in the ghost gun market. Now, some states have passed laws regarding the creation of privately made firearms from unfinished receivers. But in most states, an 80% receiver can be sold without the requirement of a federal or state background check. So, to summarize to this point, unfinished receivers, also called 80% receivers, are partially completed receivers with no serial numbers. Purchasers must perform their own finishing work in order to make their receiver usable. The finished product, if it remains for personal use only, isn't transferred, and you are not otherwise prohibited by law from possessing a firearm, then that firearm does not need a serial number, and the owner does not have to pass a background check to own it. So if it's not patently illegal, then what is all the controversy about? Well, it's traceability. In recent years, politicians and gun control advocates have claimed tracing unserialized firearms used in crimes is much harder than tracing their serialized variants. Tracing involves the ATF's ability to use the serial number off of a firearm associated with a crime to perform a trace request through the National Tracing Center, or the NTC, which is a division of the Bureau that provides investigative leads for law enforcement agencies. However, opponents argue that serial numbers are not really even the main tool that law enforcement uses to solve gun crimes, pointing to other technologies and forensic techniques that are used when serial numbers are not present or have been altered or obliterated on a firearm. And for that discussion, we have to turn our attention to a little CSI. But before we talk CSI, we need to talk Webull. As most of you know, Lawyer Up has partnered with Webull, the online broker that allows you to buy or sell stocks or crypto or whatever you're into directly from your computer or the app on your phone. Webull is free to join, it's free to use, there's no cost to buy or sell, so it's commission-free trading. Better yet, when you sign up, link a bank account, and deposit 1 penny, Webull will give you at least 2 free stocks worth at least $3 per share. So it's free money as well. So if you would like to join the over 2 million Webull traders, all you have to do is click on the link in the description below. Happy trading. So let's talk a little crime scene investigation. Most modern handguns and rifles are manufactured based upon blueprints that specify their configurations. One of these specs is a characteristic known as rifling, which refers to the spiral lands and grooves placed into the firearm's barrel to impart a spin on the bullet, which improves accuracy. The number of lands and grooves and the direction in which they twist, either right or left, can be determined by observing the engravings in the barrel. The lands are the raised area in the barrel that are imparted into a projectile as it spins down the barrel. It leaves impressions or gouges in the fired bullet. These rifling characteristics alone can reveal what brand and or model of a firearm could have fired a specific projectile. This helps to figure out if a bullet could have originated from a certain type of firearm. However, to pin a specific bullet to an exact weapon, a forensic firearm expert must use an instrument called a comparison microscope to compare a subject bullet, one recovered from, say, a crime scene, for example, to other bullets test fired from the particular gun at issue. Examiners generally will test fire into a water recovery tank to obtain comparison bullets for evaluation under a microscope. And if sufficient correspondence is found between the subject bullet and the test bullets with no unexplainable differences, the examiner can conclude that the subject bullet was fired from the suspect firearm. So the gun rights argument is that even if law enforcement has the serial number, they still have to go through the forensic process of matching the bullet from the crime scene to the recovered gun anyway. So the serial number isn't needed. And gun control advocates respond, well, yeah, but knowing the potential identity of a gun owner and the gun's transfer history could provide an important clue to solving the case. Regardless, with all of the mass shootings of late, look for the federal government to pass something, most likely a, quote, red flag law that would allow a judge to order the seizure of firearms from a person displaying red flags of potential gun violence. And several states have actually already taken action to restrict ghost guns. Let's go through a few. California. In 2016, California passed a measure requiring anyone possessing an unfinished receiver to obtain a serial number from the state and to pass a background check. And starting in 2024, firearm precursor parts may only be sold through a licensed dealer in California. Denver, Colorado. On January 4th of 2022, the mayor signed into law a bill banning ghost guns in Denver, Colorado. The law outlaws the creation, possession, transportation, discharge, and sale of firearms without serial numbers. Connecticut. Any gun receiver that is not, quote, detectable by metal detectors is banned under Connecticut law. So Connecticut has outlawed these 3D printer plastic ghost guns. Maryland. In 2022, Maryland passed legislation that bans the possession, sale, receipt, and transfer of unfinished frames or receivers that are not serialized by the manufacturer. New Jersey has enacted similar legislation to prohibit the possession, manufacture, and sale of guns or parts that are or can be untraceable. And New Jersey actually filed a lawsuit against the U.S. Patriot Armory, a company that allegedly sold AR-15 build kits to New Jersey residents. And finally, New York. New York has similar laws against ghost guns and has passed a law to prohibit the making, selling, transporting, or possessing of 3D printed guns or other untraceable firearms. And New York is considered to have the toughest ghost gun restrictions in the United States. Now, statistically, objectively, there really are no reliable statistics on how many privately made firearms are recovered in crimes nationwide. Although since the issue rose to prominence in California, the ATF has started documenting the recovery of ghost guns and has noted an increase in the number of ghost gun seizures in every year since they started keeping records. That being said, despite the increase, when compared to gun crimes in the United States nationwide, unserialized guns make up a very, very small amount of the total guns recovered. So ghost guns, should they be legal or should they be outlawed? Well, that's for you to decide. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. That's all for today. I hope you have enjoyed the episode. My name is Joshua Roberts, attorney at law, and you've been watching Lawyer Up.
Send lawyers, guns, and money. Dad, get me out of this.